Okay, good.
And so today we're going to turn the tables.
Yes, we are. mm, mm. Yeah, I'm appreciating the dynamic and the relationship that we've had for so long in terms of our um, consideration, dialogue about Adida and about the work that you do and the service and that we both do in relationship to his person and his teaching, which I know is a real passion of yours, um, and in your creation of the B Zone. So I just wanted to have the opportunity to maybe ask you some questions about yourself, and about your work that you do and the service that you do. So just to open it up initially, if there's anything that you would like to say about yourself in relationship to what you do in your B Zone work.
What I first want to say thank you for offering to ask me about the work that I do and who I am, I guess, is the other
Mm,
part of that. Not many people have approached me in that manner. I think one
mm,
person has. And so I actually look forward to actually being able to speak. Not that I have any idea
yeah,
about where we're going or what we're going to speak about, but no, I'm happy to have the opportunity to, as much as I can, express what I do and why I do it. And so I thank you for even considering it.
yep, yep. My pleasure. Because I've come to have such respect for your openness, for your insight, for your reflections, for how you've helped me and how you have made so much available for so many people, very, very broadly relative to the whole great tradition of human life and religion and spirituality, all aspects of life. And I continue to see you posting new postings, of things that you have been coming in contact with in terms of literature or world happenings or people that are involved and things that are of interest to you. And I always find the common thread that you are really very, very passionate about everyone having a voice and being able to understand what's being said and being able to participate together in a dialogue that's useful for humanity. No, this to me is interesting. I mean, beyond, and I don't, and that is like not just, oh, it's interesting. I mean, this is really interesting because to actually understand the perfection and the beauty of the divine process for any individual, to me, is the purpose of life in relationship. To explore that, to help serve that, to participate in it, and the the vastness of how it manifests is like what you were saying, you were never in the program. Well, that makes you really suited and more available because it certainly isn't a program. um, so again, what brought you into being moved to do this?
I think it's my own inquiry, and the process of what it is that I found myself involved with, in terms of awakening, I guess you might call it,
Mm,
to whatever degree. Um, because I saw it wasn't just a personal awakening or a wake up call, it was a universal wake up call. And so um, you want to share what
mm,
you have understood or what I saw about my own world and life and mind, and and so I was, from my, I'll be honest, I just had a certain kind of understanding that developed over a long period of time. And it just became apparent to me that it wasn't just a me or my story. This is a bigger story, and I'm connected to a larger happening out there in the world and people and circumstances and situations. So um, I can't not do what I do. I
Mm.
just can't. And I have to say that I've been given the opportunity by the situation of life and circumstances and relationships and lifestyle and money and whatever to be able to support myself, and that gives me the freedom to do what
Mm.
I do.
Mm.
I don't know if that's fully
No,
comprehensive.
that's a remarkable blessing, that it fell into place that way. But I don't think it was probably just like a, falling out of the sky. It seems that you're also indicating that it had to do with very real direct engagement in life, in relationship, and very direct experience in your own personal life and in relationship to the things that you coincided with in your process. And did that start at a really young age?
Well, honestly, my problem, quote unquote, was that I never could buy the program. So I always saw myself as a kind of the Holden character in uh, what was that book in high school? Um, just a lost soul. And
Mm.
so I really had no direction. I had no sense of myself. I had no idea. Plus, I have a little bit of a hearing difficulty. I'm partially deaf at certain
Okay.
frequencies.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, academically and culturally, I could never really stay with the program.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
I was always in a less than developed academic world. So I always had a deficiency psychologically and developmentally in my own character. And
Right.
so I always had this kind of feeling that I wasn't very smart because I was always put in, um, they didn't have special education classes that like learning disabilities or hearing impaired or things that I would have qualified for in my youth. But
Okay.
so they threw you in with the troublemakers, and so that was everybody with either epilepsy or uh, JDs, as they called them in my, juvenile delinquents and troublemakers, or people who just
Okay.
didn't fit in. So I always had that deficiency, but I always had a sense of I was looking, I was always watching, and I
Mm.
was observing. I mean, I didn't have the left brain in the historical, although it was around me. So I was always looking and paying attention to people and who I was looking to see who I respected or looked up to or was looking for a hero. Um,
Mm. Mm.
Things of that sort. Somebody who really inspired me,
Yep.
you know.
So who were you first inspired by? Do you have a memory of what moved you that gave you any kind of a sense of an anchor or who you were or how you could relate to the world then?
No, not until really later on in my life, in terms
Mm.
of really I could focus. Um, I have to confess. I mean, the first thing that kind of woke me up to something more that I really could investigate was after I got out of the army and I was given a tab of LSD, and for about 4 or 5 years, LSD was my investigation.
Right,
And
right.
And it wasn't
So,
through,
wow.
yeah, it wasn't through music, and it wasn't through the social, although that was part of it. But my focus was on the state that that particular substance created in my mind and
Right,
my
okay.
being. And so I
Mm,
wanted to understand what I was experiencing. And then I started to investigate an internal landscape. And
okay. Mm,
that's where I got my sense of things. It was through a
yeah.
kind of and it wasn't through Carlos Castaneda or anything of that sort, you know. It was more of a kind of a, if you will, a mystical. I don't want to put a lot of stuff on it. But that,
Sure,
you know,
sure.
that was my focus. That was my focus. That was my focus. But I
Okay.
also had to adapt to the world. I did get a degree. I studied, but most of my graduate studies was it was in special education, and that fit with my
Mm,
profession. But my real
mm,
passion was understanding the psyche, the psychology, the philosophy, and things of that sort. And you know, after a while, LSD no longer serves in the sense that you've got to get it engaged in your life, what it is that I'm experiencing. So meditation became a central part of my life, and that's what got me into Buddhism. And
okay. Yep, yep. Well, that's a pretty broad spectrum of experience, what you just described. Really broad and significant because when I hear you speaking about it, of course, my heart goes out to you in feeling sympathy for the context within which you grew up, and all of us as an innocent at that point in time, and trying to make sense out of the world, and uh, and then the effects that of what you associated with, even into going into the army, and what you were describing of the circumstance of those who were you were thrown in with, you know, the bullies, the misfits, the all of those dynamics, and then but then what I was wondering is, where did you grow up? Like, were you in a rough neighborhood, or was it what kind of a setting did you grow up in?
I grew up in a
Mm.
Walt Disney World. I grew up on Long Island. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
born 45, right?
Mm.
And so the world that I grew up in was a Walt Disney World, Spin and Marty and
That's great.
you know, that kind of world. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
and I was an athlete and whatever, and good. I was a good boy. I was not a troublemaker
So
or
you
a
didn't
wise
you didn't
ass.
take on that costume by virtue of association with the ones that you ended up at an earlier time being thrown in with, because it seemed like you were impaired in some way. You became strong in relationship to that as a result of that challenge.
Well, you had to be strong in the world that I grew up in. You had to, you know, you had to
Yeah.
stand up for yourself. You had to fight.
Mm.
You were definitely put in a pecking order of who's
Right.
stronger, who could beat up who,
Yeah.
and whatever. That was just part. You had to do that. So, I
Mm.
mean, I wasn't just pushed around, but
Yeah.
you know, after a while, I found I was allowed to participate to whatever level I was allowed to participate in, which was, you know, I was nobody pushed me around.
Yeah.
Um, but I was not engaged. I mean, was an athlete. I played shortstop in high school and baseball and football and
Mm.
whatever. Um, but I wasn't engaged. I was an observer. I really
Yeah.
didn't. Um, I wasn't out front. I wasn't in the front of the class.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was in the back. I was
Mm.
watching, and I was really looking for something that was of substance. And
Yes.
even the academic world never. I mean, I was interested in learning, but I
Mm.
couldn't read very well.
Mm.
Um, I never really studied. My uncle was a professor at NYU, and he would always want to speak history. My father was a jazz musician um, and and worked in Manhattan in advertising and publishing later on. But
Mm.
but I was an observer, and I was kind of the quiet kid in the back, if you will. But you know, nothing really um, took. Nothing really grabbed me. What I did see, though, honestly, what I did see was the cruelty that people were doing with one another. So my
Okay.
example that I used later on to when I talk to people is that I remember every time there was a group of people, 3 or 4 teenagers or whatever, and they'd get around and everybody, oh, we'd all be talking as if we were buddy buddies or whatever. And as soon as one person left that group and had to leave, immediately that group started talking about that other person. And they were
Yes.
not nice to that person. And I said,
Yeah.
well, wait, it just dawned on me that people have a two-faced way about them. They're not really fully honest.
Yeah.
I just, people didn't really, I didn't get any sense of, I didn't really, people didn't impress me. They
Yeah.
really,
Yeah. Yeah.
true, the
Well,
deep
so
part.
mm, that must have been exacerbated. I mean, you mentioning yourself having to be in the context of war. Were you actually in combat?
No, my brother was a fighter pilot, so I was in cryptology. So I was more in the passing secret messages. So my brother went to Vietnam. I had not a lot. My mother had 3 children, boys in the army at the same time. My older brother, myself in middle, and my younger brother. So we were all
Mm.
in the army. My brother was a fighter pilot in the Air Force. I was in the army. My brother was in the army. So both of us were sent there, but we were sent back because my older brother was there. So both
Mm.
myself and my other brother went to Germany, and I was in a satellite receiver station, and that's really when I started to grow up in a way
Mm.
because the army would requires you to grow up. And I
Yeah.
did then find out that I had some skills, at least the army said I was not, had an IQ of more than 70.
Okay.
and
Mm-hmm.
and so then I started to get a sense that I was more than just, a loser or whatever. So the army brought me up to a certain manhood, and that's
Mm.
when I got involved with uh, a lot of I got involved with a lot of women. I, I I hooked up with these people who owned a bar in Saarbrücken in Germany, and she owned a bar, and she was from Paris. She was an older woman. She took me under her wing. She had about 15 young women who she traveled back and forth with to work with GIs in
Okay.
Germany. So she took me under her wing, and I just got in with 1 or 2 other friends of mine. So
Mm.
I grew up rather quickly when I was in the army, but mostly with
Mm.
women. Yeah, mostly with black folks. That's another thing that was always very prominent in my life. I wound up being around a lot of black people, African Americans, and so
Well,
I
that's
was
wonderful.
with,
Mm.
yeah, until around
Mm.
1967. And then
Mm.
things changed because being white, I was with a black woman and we were together and I was in a black community. And then in 67, it just became, you couldn't be white in this setting. The black culture got a little radical, at least the people that I was associated with. So I was not allowed to be in the places that I used to be able to be in. Anyway.
Right. Yeah. So when that occurred, had you already begun to participate in this inter-investigation that was triggered by your making use of the intoxicants, the LSD and
No, that was only after the army, and that's when I was in college, and
okay.
um, and that's when it started. And then that brought me into literature. I didn't go to music. I didn't go to poetry. I didn't go to, later on those things. Most people went to music and when LSD and mushrooms and even downers and speed and cocaine didn't come until the 80s. I'm talking about the 60s and the 70s. Um, no, I wanted to read. I wanted to study. I wanted to find out what was said about these things in the literature. Nobody around me knew. They were just partying or uh, not a
So
lot of.
did this all of these different influences and what you're describing in terms of how you felt like you began to grow up as a man, and then also the carrying the kind of observation or awareness of what you were participating in and evaluations being made, and then growing up and feeling a bit stronger and more confident in yourself, and then combined with the experiences that you had with the LSD. Um, was there a period of time in which you began to feel that you sort of formulated something of a sense of your purpose or yourself in relationship to the world?
No, it was peripheral. I mean, I did wind up, like I said, going to college and getting a degree and studying and becoming a certified teacher and a master's in special education. I mean, I peripherally played the game, so to speak, to just function, have some livelihood. I wasn't just going to, well, for a period of time, I really did not engage. I mean, I had these credentials and I had these opportunities, but I'll quickly say, I went down to New Orleans. I spent my undergraduate work and my graduate work in New Orleans at University of New Orleans and Tulane and other universities down there. And I wound up getting married to a very, very wonderful woman who was part of the upper class of the Blue Bloods of New Orleans. And I was put into this social environment. I was a long-haired hippie, and this is New Orleans in 1971. And,
Okay, 70, yeah.
you know, you could still have trouble with the white and black water fountains, and not in New Orleans
Okay.
per se, but you go to Jackson, Mississippi, or Meridian, or Lacombe, or up to Franklin, and
Yeah,
Baton Rouge,
yeah,
and Monroe. You run into all these
yeah,
things. Um,
yeah.
but I didn't really engage life. My wife she worked with CBS Records in Manhattan. And during this early period of time when music in New York, and it was a happening time, and she was in Manhattan, and she finally moved down to New Orleans, and then she kept working at the radio station and the TV stations, and I just engaged myself with Buddhism and meditation, and I got involved with Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche and the Naropa Institute and started studying, and I really never engaged. I taught Buddhism at the Free University. I was a meditator. I was part of a study. I started a study group in New Orleans for Trungpa, and people would come over my house. We'd have 15, 30 people over my house on the weekends, and my wife was scratching her head because she was not understanding everything, and I was not engaged. I was not making money. I was at one point just chopping firewood and selling it and living hand to mouth. And at that time, we had a child, and that did not sit well. And finally, you know, after 7 years, he said, I don't love you anymore, and I've got a little boyfriend on the side, and see you later. And that's really what kicked my ass and got me involved with, okay, I got to get my shit together. I just can't meditate all the time. I was not doing any drugs or anything like that.
Okay, okay,
And
yeah.
and at that time, I worked in a residential treatment center as a counselor, and then I wound up working in the mental institution as a learning disability specialist. And then I got into
Wow.
theater, and I started doing
Right.
theater, and then I got into my little Playboy period for about 4 or 5 years until it just
Mm,
got too wild and crazy.
mm,
And
mm.
then and
So,
then during this
yeah.
period of time, that's when Adida came into my life in about He was I met Arida in 1972 through the knee of listening, 1973 in Sausalito.
Mm.
I was traveling around the country, and his first book was The Knee of Listening, and then The Method of the Siddhas. Now,
Mm-hmm.
by this time, I have a little bit of a background in literature and study and things like that by 1973. And so when I was
Mm.
reading Arida, the book, The Knee of Listening, oh, yeah, okay, good. But I'm not a God. I'm not into God. I'm a Buddhist. And because of my experiences with LSD, I understand that what the light is and the, the, the domain of the divine, but I never found
Mm.
a God, nor did I ever find myself, right?
Mm. Yep.
This,
Yep.
there was never, I always saw that there was this me who was watching everything or was experiencing things, and I began to suspect that what this me was, because I really didn't even have a social ego, right?
Okay.
So
Mm. Mm.
I suspected, I didn't understand, and I understood through traveling through these experiences with acid that this me was an obstacle to travel.
Mm.
You couldn't go into these places with the mind. You had to go with your heart. And so there was a
Okay.
yoga associated with all of this too. It
Mm. Mm.
gets a little complicated, but anyway.
How, but how, in terms of the heart entering into it, how did you become aware of that as a
um,
necessity? Because you're describing a
well,
lot of being disengaged and awareness, sitting back, observing, and still, living all of the experience, a lot of vast experiences that you've had so far, and of many, many different levels of the being. And then there's the heart. This is, you're mentioning the heart, and then obviously you're coming into Adida's sphere
now
of
I'm
teaching.
gonna tell you, and this does not play well because and I'm not reading anything that you're asking me a straight up question. I'm gonna give you a straight up answer.
Sure, sure. That's all
So
I ever want.
So one time, I'm in an old Westbury. I'm in an estate in old Westbury, where these old railroad barons had these huge estates. My friend Jimi Hendrix is his name, and Carmen Ortez. We were all doing LSD one night, and they lived in this castle. It was a castle, and it was an estate in old Westbury. And they
Mm,
went off and they did their thing, and I'm sitting there in this big old castle, and I'm starting to go. And I'm leaving and I'm under the influence of LSD. And I realize that I'm saying goodbye. I mean, I'm just kind of I'm really, oh, I'm saying goodbye. I'm saying goodbye. I'm saying goodbye. I'm saying goodbye. And I'm realizing that I'm leaving this
mm,
world or my
mm,
identity or my family. I'm saying goodbye to my father. I'm saying goodbye to my mother. I'm saying goodbye to my friends. I'm leaving. And I'm
mm,
under the influence of LSD and I'm not realizing. And then at one point I go, oh, I died. And then I felt a knot in my stomach.
mm,
And I said, why am I doing that? And immediately that opened and my consciousness went from my stomach to my heart. My heart exploded
okay.
open.
Mm,
And I realized that, oh, I'm not, I didn't even know about, I'm not there. I didn't know. I said, oh, I'm not there. I'm here. Meaning that
mm,
it was the first time I got a sense that I didn't even know I was operating out of my navel. I didn't even know
right.
that.
Sure.
All of a sudden, oh, the heart is where I am. I'm in my heart. I
Mm,
didn't even
mm,
fully understand that. So that's when I
beautiful.
realized my center was my heart. And
Mm.
from that period of time, I always operated out of my heart as opposed
Mm.
what I had to engage the navel and whatever. But that's
Mm.
where the heart became the center of what
Mm.
I understood I was operating out of my heart as opposed to my navel.
Mm. That's significant. That's wonderful to hear that so vividly. It's very vivid, like what you're describing. I completely can comprehend and feel the significance of that. And what year was this?
That was 1973.
Okay. So, in the context of obviously so much has occurred for you since then, but at that moment in time, it seems that a lot came together in the midst of your relationship to reality itself, to life itself, to truth itself, to the divine itself, to light itself,
Well,
to,
this
yeah.
is where I now lived from. I trusted where I was. I found where I
Mm,
was. And now I could
mm,
operate. I didn't have the mental capacity. I didn't have the social thing. I mean, I had my degree and all that stuff, but I operated out of my heart, and I always trusted my heart. Now, believe
mm.
me, it wasn't a easy ride home to
Sure.
where I am now at 77. But I want to
Mm,
tell you, it always proved to be the truth of where things were and what it eventually worked out. Although it was trial and error, and I was rejected, but everything transformed itself into another opportunity or another thing. There was never an
mm.
end. See, this is
Right.
one of, this is the, it gave me like, there was just this opening. It was just open.
Mm,
It was just open. And there was never an
mm,
end. There's never an end.
mm,
It just keeps
mm,
going.
mm,
So I was
mm.
never like, barriers didn't really stop me. And even
Yeah.
not, I didn't operate out of mind so much. I operated out of a sense of like my intuition.
So
So
you
I
were
mean,
available. You were available. Um, from what you're describing, my feeling, intuition of it is that the influences that came into your field, into the patterning or and your feeling awareness in relationship to that many of those things coincided or came together at a point that there was you could call it an awakening, an epiphany, an understanding.
no,
A,
there's a lot of trial and error. There was nothing
yeah,
mystical, nothing mystical. It was all about engaging life, getting life
yeah,
straight, working with life. It had nothing. I mean, it did have that. To me, it had a different level of it. But most of the beginning of this whole process was getting
okay,
life straight, relationships
yeah,
straight, life straight, money straight, uh, just getting straight. And where it
and
was not complicated, it didn't interfere. Finally,
okay, yeah,
things
yeah. Okay, so I hear what you're saying in the level in which you were functioning at that point in time and incarnating. Yeah,
incarnating.
and yeah. So, and what I'm pointing to is the influences that perhaps served that process because
Oh,
you
now
weren't
remember,
independent. Yeah,
yeah, no,
yeah,
I mean,
and
I'm meditating,
mm,
I'm reading, I'm connecting with Adidas literature now, and I'm reading. I
yeah,
mean, because of my deficiencies in my early life.
sure.
I mean, from I mean, I would have 10, 15 books next to my chair every night. I was a
Mm,
voracious reader. I read everything, history, science,
yeah.
math, just in terms of
Wow.
study.
This certainly. I'm very grateful to hear this kind of detail. While we've had our conversations and connection for quite a long time now, it's almost going to be 10 years next year. and um, and I want to continue this because it really is moving. I find the life story, of the living being and its process of manifestation and the influences that awaken us in life and then we are brought into an incredible process of what you describe also as a motive to serve, then, to help, your sensitivity to trying to help people, to give back, from what you have learned and what your experience has been and what you've come to understand, and in paradoxically the incredible knowledge
Well, this
that
is
you have
interesting
carried.
because I never fit in the middle of the program. I was always
Mm-hmm.
on in deeply disturbed, psychologically, educationally deficient, criminal, prisons, working with, like I said, backward mental institutions, residential treatment centers. And then I wound up getting into the public school period of time when I ran alternative programs for every kid that got kicked out of school in Richmond and Vallejo and in Northern
Right.
California, and ran
Mm,
alternative programs, and 90% of those kids were Black or brown. And it was always
mm,
a street environment. That's where New York
mm,
really served me, because I could
mm,
hang with the
mm,
with the
mm,
with that kind of environment and not be intimidated
mm,
um,
mm,
by that. So I was always in a very difficult, visceral, street level life and mental
mm,
health stuff.
mm,
But remember, Adida was very important to me from the time of the method of the citizen 73,
yeah.
74. That's really when I made my connection, or he made his connection with me, I should say.
Mm,
That because then I found out he was the one. He knew more than anybody, and I
mm,
read a lot, and I continued to read a lot, but nobody even came close to the what he said and how he said it. And as I said, I was not a God man, so I didn't get drawn to
mm,
the guru in that manner. Um,
mm,
but I was
mm,
very much influenced by his literature, and only later, it was not until 1983, I think, that I actually had an opportunity to come into his physical company.
right.
And,
Yeah.
and that again confirmed what I have had already known outside of his
Mm,
company.
mm, mm,
So,
mm, mm.
yeah.
Which
But
is
I,
a very significant, again, that's the fact that you were able to, and this is many, many thousands of people have had a similar kind of a, introduction or an intervention, you know, in relationship to Adi Da and his work in this world, and so to feel the manner in which, and the time in which he came into your life, the perfection of it, it's just beautiful. You're and when you describe the way that you describe, I now feel you in this point in the way that you're expressing. You're very anchored. Then you've come to a point in life because of the way that you realized you had to engage. The responsibilities that you had to take, and your fervor for that in relationship to happen. To be to take responsibility at that level. Was very important for you, and different than when you were describing, but also it feels from what you have communicated that there was also this kind of unique feeling awareness of things because of an apparent disability, in relationship to life and how you fit in, is and yet that plus what you were, the demand that was made in terms of you actually manifesting and incarnating in a human way, is something that you express often. The necessity for that level of growing up and engaging in life is a necessary foundation to be able to continue to participate in the awakening, the process in life.
well, for me, I don't know how people could do it opposite. I think Ramdas used to say it's vertical schizophrenia, meaning that you don't handle the basics. Because if you don't handle the basics, you always got to be drawn back into dealing with whatever shit that you got to deal with, whether it's be money, food, or sex, as he talks about. And when you get
Yeah.
that stuff handled, then you're free. Your attention is free to deal. It's not that any of that goes away, but it's not disturbing. It's got
Mm.
a certain equanimity to it. There's a certain balance. It doesn't keep on raising its head, saying,
Mm.
you got to do this and you got to do that. There's a certain level of that. But you also have a certain level of what you will do and what you won't do. And you're
Mm. Mm.
clarified in what you will do and what you won't do. And you won't put up with this and you won't put up with that. And I'm not going to wipe your ass. You got to wipe your ass. That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's a little hard ass, but I guess that's my New
Well,
York thing too.
yeah, but look at what you worked with, and these were people that you really wanted to help. Everybody is in need, and some seem to be obviously more in need than others. But when you describe you're working in a mental institution with the young men that needed to have help, and also even in the context of the psychedelic experiments, the different variations of people working in the Black community. There's
Well, yes, but I also saw something in that world that kept people in that situation, that there
yeah,
was something there that they didn't want to leave. They didn't want to change. There was this
mm,
kind of albatross that kept them in the suffering and this dysfunction
mm,
and this
mm,
complaining world, that there was something, even though you could hand them something on a silver platter and you could put an appointment out there to get a
yeah,
job or take them to the DMV to get this or do
yeah,
that, they'd fuck
yeah,
it up
yeah.
over and over and over. And then you really get to see, like, whoa, am I just being kind of here or what's going on? And then, oh, my mother and my sister, my brother, and all these
Yeah,
things, and the
yeah,
constellation of their life, they were so kind of connected to this
yes,
dysfunction that
yeah, yeah.
they
Well,
didn't.
when you're saying that, it immediately reminds me of Adida's words and about the ego is an addict, and also then the revelation or the insight that you were given about the knot in the navel, and the release of that, and the place is the heart to move from there and to live from there rather than the knot in the navel. And of course, that through your study, not only with Adida, but then in the course of your life experience, and then studies of other traditions, and just even human growth, that the necessity for that responsibility and growing up as a foundation being absolutely essential. And the reason I'm appreciative of that is because, as you know, I had to do that too, even after having been in Adidas company for so many years, where it would have been presumed that, I would have handled all of that stuff and should have and could have and would have, you know, in that particularly unique situation that I was in for so long. And I was graced by his blessing and his instruction, engage. Now put it to the test. It doesn't happen in this secluded kind of a program or a world that's separated out from being absolutely having to be responsible in life. And so when you remind me of that all the time, and I can feel why now, and the integrity in it. Mm.
As you're speaking, there's another element to that, is that the victim consciousness that goes along with that things
Yes.
happen to you and that you have
Mm.
no control over. And I'm a victim of this and I'm a victim of that. And then you did this to me and blah, 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 blah.
Yes.
All of that stuff. Once you start to see that you have to take responsibility, I have to take responsibility
Yeah.
primarily, then
Yes.
you can work with all the variances of he said, she said, conflicts, whatever. But
Mm.
fundamentally, I'm responsible for what is going on in my response and my reaction. And, you could hit me, but I know I did something for you to hit me. And if
Mm.
I get in a traffic accident, I do know I have a bit of responsibility in that. There's something I
Mm.
did to contribute to
Mm.
that no matter how
Mm,
much I get busted up and how much you went through the red light. Um,
right.
you know,
Yeah. Yeah. And the interconnectedness that we've spoken about a lot, is that,
that's
that the,
key.
yeah. And then so what you're describing too also leads me to ask, do you feel that that gave you then that maturing and maturity and responsibility humanly gave you at the heart and that real caring, that sense of right and wrong and what you need to take responsibility for and how and hard won, you know, um, that and blessed, the things that came together as they did, that you now felt that you were more prepared to relate to the notion of the divine in a different way, or God, like when you said that you didn't really relate to a God idea.
Um, Ask me that in a different way.
Um, well, did your notion of relating to God, did a God enter your world at the point, and it never felt like that? Okay, so describe to me anything about that.
Well, I would say dimensions of divine dimensions. I can feel. Okay, so I have to then what you're speaking about me is now my internal world, my meditative world, my the world that I could explore through later on when I was drinking ayahuasca with the shamans in Brazil for 6 or 7 years, where I could travel through this and I could be in dimensions that are castles of light and divinity. And I mean, I could say I just put me downstairs and put me in a lotus position and throw me a piece of bread every 3 days, that kind of thing.
I get
Um,
that.
um, there, I get God, when you say God, I don't have a concept or an idea. I do have a sense of divinity, of pure bliss, if you will, um, of the unity, of sublimity, of beyond lives upon lives, beyond lives, beyond the mind, beyond, whatever. So I just can't, I don't have a concept, I can't speak. I mean, I can say the word and I get an intuition, but I don't, it's too singular to say a God because it's all unified. It's just, it's,
Okay, so, and was this your awareness early on, or was this something that you have become, that has, you've awakened into more vividly, more tacitly? Because I know the word itself is loaded. Like, and for me, of course, you didn't then have a lot of mind forms relative to a God in your upbringing or a
oh,
notion
well,
of
I know.
God.
I mean, I grew up a Catholic. I mean, I was an altar boy. I prayed. I just always knew there must be some happening God somewhere. And I prayed to God and prayed to God. And about 12 or 13 years old, I remember standing out in front of Webster Street on a rainy day saying, please, God, if you're there, please give me a sign. Please, please. And I never got a sign. Um,
Hmm.
I'm not saying that. Coupled with your question, I have to say that there is also a sense of who this one here is, me,
Mm-hmm.
because um, I don't want to get cute, but I never found a sense of myself. I never found a person here. And I don't want to
Mm.
get cute with that, but there is this sense that there is truly, um, I don't take as myself. I don't take myself as a self, as a little self. as it so much. I mean, I understand the three egos and all of that, and I understand in meditation what is mind and what limits everything and the knots, and I understand all of that. But I'm just not clear, I guess, to communicate that there's this divinity there and I'm here kind of stuff. It all blends. It doesn't, I don't even begin to, I mean, I ask these questions. I've gone over deep philosophical contemplation for decades. I've studied Madhyamaka and I'm really familiar with all the nuances of Buddhist and Hindu and other philosophical systems. And after a while, I've kind of given up on this kind of splitting the atom, I call it, you know?
Right. So when I'm asking you this question, you're speaking of a understanding that has been, what would be the word? It's a direct feeling experience or knowledge of something that is greater than just a sense of an independent, separate self.
Much greater, and it's not conceptual, and it's not even perceptual. Although there are perceptions in the astral dimensions, but when you get into these non-formed transcendental dimensions, there is no mind. There's no discriminating. There's really the heart that's kind of running the show here, and you are really now having to deal with a psychic force that's planetary. It's not within the planetary system. It's not in the cosmic system. It's not in the form system. It's in a transcendental dimension, and so I can't speak to that. I don't keep, there's an intuition, and I don't know. I really come to that place of ignorance. I really don't know. Not in a duh. It's like I trust. I trust. I just trust.
Yeah.
And I never try to do these first principles anymore.
Yeah. So it feels to me that it would be the next time that we talk would be good to explore that more, because that understanding is not as easily graspable as the understandings that you came to relative to this matter of the human incarnation and responsibility. But the nuances of what you're describing, because of the vastness of experiences that you have had, and with the heart impulse of this "Who am I?" Understanding, that would be something that would be useful to explore more.
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Yeah.
And I appreciate your questions. And I don't have I don't think I've done this before, so it's
yeah. No, I this to me is interesting. I mean, beyond, and I don't, that is like not just, oh, it's interesting. I mean, this is really interesting, because to actually understand the perfection and the beauty of the divine process for any individual, to me, is the purpose of life in relationship. To explore that, to help serve that, to participate in it, and the vastness of how it manifests is like what you were saying, you were never in the program. Well, that makes you really suited and more available because it certainly isn't a program.
Well, I have to say, it's interesting now that I'm in this older phase here, and when I re-enter into these quote programs at an older age and a more, I don't know, able age of nuance and knowing how to work with people and be with people and stuff like that. there's such a freedom that, I mean, you're really only working up against people's limitations, and you're working within this kind of, narrow bandwidth that most people just stay in. And I feel myself so far outside of that. But okay, so if you just want to play in this little field here, okay, we'll play in this. I understand that this is a big institution here, and it's got a lot of names and people around it, but you're still operating in a very small bandwidth here. And so it's
Right.
really kind of
Very,
interesting
yes.
to come back
Yeah. Yeah.
and re-enter a quality places that I do mix with, and quality people. But to see how narrow people operate, the narrow bandwidth that people operate in. They don't have the joy, the feeling of space.
Yeah, yeah. The perpetual intent to constantly be defined, identify with and be defined, that in and of itself, that is the narrowing, that is the pinning down. It makes everything very small and completely unavailable.
Yeah, so when I take literature classes and read these stories and get to see the worlds that people have created and what offends them and what upsets them and what they're dealing with, and you go, God,
Well, you've certainly had a lot of experience in that from what you're describing thus far, and it would be, you've only intimated to me, because I haven't spoken to you a lot about your own. We've had a lot of interaction, obviously, lots, but we haven't done this. So I'm very grateful that you're available for this.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate you listening and hearing me and receiving me. I do, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess.
You've done it with me for a long time. And you're still here in the room with me. So thank you, too. Okay, so we'll do this again soon.
Okay, much love to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You too. Thank you.
All right.